This story involves the eldest daughter-in-law, who didn't even come out to greet her mother-in-law when she came to deliver homemade kimchi, but instead told her over the intercom to leave the kimchi at the front door. Upon hearing this, a lot of angry words were thrown at the eldest daughter-in-law. Interestingly, the parents-in-law also seemed to feel relieved. What could have happened? Let's take a look together. Please subscribe and like our channel.
Hello. I'm a working mom in my late 30s with 2 children. I was really upset because my in-laws were being treated poorly. Can there be another daughter-in-law in this world who doesn't even come out to see her in-laws? Who came to give her kimchi, and tells them to leave it at the door through the intercom? I think it's not okay to treat your in-laws like that, while living so comfortably because everything is taken care of by them. I cursed at my older brother who's over 10 years older than me. I think I overreacted because I had a very unpleasant experience with my older brother. My husband is the youngest of 3 brothers, and my in-laws are good people when I look at them objectively. My in-laws both have strong personalities, so it can be a bit hard at times. But their other good aspects outweigh that, so I respect them. They also supported us when we got married. And my parents also had to work very hard to give us the same support. Despite their support, they never bragged about it, and said they were sorry for giving us less than my parents. My younger uncle and younger brother also feel sorry for us. Comparing it like that, my husband and I could have complaints. But we received enough support from both families, compared to others that we have no complaints at all. My mother-in-law has a strong personality, but she's a person who has gone through a lot of heartache, taking care of her parents-in-law until they passed away. I know she also lived in her in-laws' house for quite a long time. I think she deserves praise just for living frugally and taking good care of the household, even though she has never worked outside the home. My older aunt got married early. My older aunt and older brother are the same age, and I heard they got married due to a premarital pregnancy. My in-laws accepted my older brother as their daughter-in-law without any complaints, and even provided a house, didn't receive any dowry, and took care of all the household chores. Considering my mother-in-law's personality, she's not the type to make her daughter-in-law live in her in-laws' house. However, my older brother was a person who always talked about how she had come to her in-laws' house at a young age and lived in hardship. My in-laws are the type who are happy if their children come, and don't mind if they don't. They have the mindset that they don't want their son to start hard after getting married, so they should provide a house for each. They provided a house each for the first and second child. But they could only provide housing deposit for us, the youngest. So they often say they are sorry to us. Whenever I bought something or cooked something for my in-laws, they always gave me money. Even when I said why they gave me money when I wanted to give it to them, my mother-in-law gave me money, saying, "What money do you guys have to do this?" Even when I refused very much, she gave me money under the pretext of pocket money for the children. Recently, she has started to accept my persuasion, and just accept it. I convinced my in-laws that they should accept it, because it's what their children want to give, and their children would be grateful if they enjoyed what was given. It was something that the second brother and I talked about, and the second brother told me to talk to them because I was good at talking. So I talked to my in-laws. The second brother is a housewife. The second brother's husband is working alone, but also helps a lot with housework. My in-laws didn't make their children do housework when they were growing up, but they are proud that they know how to help their wives after getting married. We are a dual-income family, but my husband is a bit crafty with housework. If I go to my in-laws' house and complain that my husband doesn't do much housework, my mother-in-law gets stern and scolds my husband. Honestly, I don't mind doing more housework. I'm satisfied that my mother-in-law takes my side. Maybe it's because my husband earns more than me, so I don't have many complaints. As I raised my 2 sons, I often thought that my mother-in-law was a person of character. When my sons get married, can I support them as much as my in-laws did? Can I talk and act like my mother-in-law? I thought about this, but I realized that I couldn't act like my mother-in-law. The second brother had the same thoughts as me. My older brother's family often goes on night 2-day trips on weekends. I heard they often go with my older brother's parents, but I wondered why they don't take my in-laws on trips. But I never talked about it. But recently, I heard some shocking news. My mother-in-law was driven away from my older aunt's house and came back. It was such a shock to me, but I thought about how much of a shock it must have been for my mother-in-law, who was the person involved. We usually make kimchi in early November. This time, my older brother's family didn't come. This has always been a complaint for me and the second brother. My older brother sometimes came on kimchi making day and sometimes didn't. But my mother-in-law always made kimchi for my older brother's family. Even when I cautiously said not to give it if they don't come, it was no use. This time, we also made kimchi for my older brother's family. And my older aunt said she would come to get it the next day. But she said she couldn't because something came up. So my in-laws went to my older brother's house to give them a jar of kimchi first, but they just came back. My mother-in-law went to my older brother's house with a jar of kimchi and rang the doorbell, and my older brother asked my mother-in-law why she came through the intercom. When my mother-in-law said she brought a jar of kimchi, my older brother said the house was a mess right now, so she should leave the kimchi at the door and go. My mother-in-law was so dumbfounded that she almost collapsed on the spot. My mother-in-law was going to leave the jar of kimchi and go. But my father-in-law said, "What do we have to give to those people?" and brought the kimchi back. And the next day, my older aunt came to my in-law's house and took the kimchi. My mother-in-law didn't say anything. So only the second brother and I were furious. I barely stopped my husband, who said he wouldn't leave my older brother and his wife alone. Time passed and that incident was forgotten. My in-laws didn't say anything. But how upset must they have been about that incident? They must have been so hurt and unable to say anything because of their pride. My older brother came to her in-laws' house with nothing but her body. I know that my in-laws provided her with a house and all the household chores, and helped her to some extent when she said she was having a hard time. But my older brother always talked as if she was playing a big role as the eldest daughter-in-law. How pathetic must my mother-in-law have felt when she heard that. But even then, my mother-in-law barely said anything bad to my older brother. And last week, we all gathered at my in-laws' house. We had a meal at a Chinese restaurant near my in-laws' house, and went to my in-laws' house together. My older brother has a college student and a high school student, but neither of them came that day. The children of the second brother and our children came, and they went into a room and played together. We were eating fruit in the living room, but for some reason, my older brother talked about how she had a hard time when she got married, more than usual that day. I was barely holding back my anger. My older sister-in-law was saying that she came to her in-laws' house at a young age, took care of her in-laws for a year, raised 2 children, and lived while serving her husband. But anyone who heard this would think my older sister-in-law was some kind of martyr. And she prided herself on being a dutiful daughter-in-law. She said she did all the sacrificial food by herself before her younger siblings-in-law moved in, and took care of all the big and small matters in the house. That day, for the first time, my mother-in-law said something to her daughter-in-law. She said that we lived together because you couldn't prepare a house to live in. And what did you do then? She said, You guys were living off us, not you taking care of us. My second brother and I looked at each other with surprised expressions. When my older sister-in-law said something strange, my second brother and I really wanted to say something. But my mother-in-law told us not to, saying it would cause discord between the siblings. But I was so glad that my mother-in-law said this. My older sister-in-law looked surprised. Then she barely said, "Mom, it hurts my feelings when you say that." My father-in-law raised his voice saying, "You're hurt. What are you hurt about?" But I intervened and said, "You came to your in-laws' house with nothing but your body and lived comfortably thanks to your in-laws. So, shouldn't you be good to your in-laws?" When I said this, my older sister-in-law got angry and said, "What did I do? I've been living well until now." She was so confident when she said this, that I was almost convinced for a moment. Living well. What did you do well? Is coming to your in-laws' house only when you feel like it on sacrificial days? Or kimchi making days being good to your in-laws? When I said this, my second brother said, "Is that all? You only come when you feel like it on our parents-in-law's birthdays too." My older sister-in-law couldn't control her expression, but I said, "Does a person who claims to be a dutiful daughter-in-law drive her in-laws away at the door? That's something a disobedient son would do." My older aunt asked what I was talking about, so I told her everything. That my mother-in-law went to deliver kimchi, but my older brother didn't even open the door, and told her to leave the jar of kimchi at the door, and said that our parents-in-law were like delivery people. My older sister-in-law said, "That's not it. The house was a mess at that time, so I did that because I was embarrassed to show it to my in-laws." I thought, is this even human? My husband said, "So is your face also a mess that you didn't even show your face?" And my second aunt said, "Did our parents go looking for you because they wanted to see your ugly face that day?" Our parents-in-law didn't stop us either. My older aunt told my older sister-in-law to follow her and went home. The next day, my older sister-in-law called. She cursed at me, even using swear words with numbers in them. She was living off her in-laws' support and wanted to go out and play with her own parents, I suppose. She must be a person without gratitude or conscience towards her in-laws. My older sister-in-law was yelling at me. She once called me a crazy woman under her breath. Do you think our in-laws are not saying anything because they have nothing to say to a bitch like you? They're not saying anything because they are decent people. Do you? A bitch like you only treat those who beat and scold you well. You're a bitch. With that she hung up the phone, saying she didn't want to talk to someone who wasn't human, and that I should hang up. My older sister-in-law called my second brother and said I had cursed at her terribly. But the funny thing is, my second brother said, if she did something to deserve being cursed at, then she should be cursed at. Later, my in-laws said they would consider their oldest son as if he were not their child anymore. They also said they would prevent him from coming to see them. That day, all we did was comfort our in-laws, but when we got home, my husband honestly said that it was their parents who raised my older sister-in-law like that. He said her bad habits were caused by them giving her everything unconditionally. I really gave my husband a piece of my mind. I asked him why he and my second aunt-in-law, who were given the same, didn't act like my older aunt-in-law, and he just closed his mouth. In fact, my older sister-in-law's children don't visit often. They probably don't know who they owe their comfortable life to. My parents-in-law said that parents should teach their children that kind of thing. I think that's right. Anyway, we plan to visit our in-laws every week because we think our in-laws will be very upset. Our in-laws are always waiting for our children.
This story seems to contain great wisdom for real-life situations. You're right. Children need to be taught by their parents to recognize those who appreciate them and adore them. It seems that those who always give unconditionally are often taken advantage of by the recipients. I've also had similar experiences and struggles. I believe many people will be able to relate to this.